What's up, guys? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about art influences that the 12 pictures of The Secret are based on or have some very similar traits to them. I've already talked about in the first video esoteric and religious philosophies that were embedded in the pictures. In the second video, I talked about astrological zodiac symbols that were in the pictures. This one is going to have to do with famous artists who most likely influenced a lot of these pictures. There's going to be 4 artists that I'm going to be focusing on. 2 of them were named supposed grandmasters of the Priory of Sion, the first one being Leonardo da Vinci, the second one being Sandro Botticelli, and the other 2, one of them being Nicolas Poussin. And here we see his name mentioned in the Wikipedia page for somebody Plantar to use one of his mottos, Et in Arcadia Ego. I'm going to be talking about a few of his paintings. And the last one is going to be of a man named Albrecht Dürer. Now, Albrecht Dürer was a German Renaissance painter. He was a contemporary of Raphael, Bellini, and Leonardo da Vinci, and he was in contact with all 3, so a little bit of a connection there with Leonardo da Vinci. But I would say that Albrecht Dürer has a lot of paintings and engravings and woodworks that have a lot more to do with most of these uh, pictures than the rest. But all 4 of them will be people that I talk about. I won't be talking about the Montreal picture so much because I've already made the connection with Rembrandt. Here we could see the Rembrandt pictures having a little bit of the same style and design, coloration and everything like that. So as this is the Montreal picture is most likely that of a Rembrandt, I won't be talking about this one, but the other 11 I'll be talking about. So next we'll move to Roanoke and we'll start from there. So on the left we have the Roanoke picture, and I'm going to be using a couple of pictures from Albrecht Dürer, and the first one is going to be that of the crucifixion of Jesus. And if we were to zoom in, we can kind of see the shape of a cross at the top with the arms outstretched, and there is a garb or a tunic over the midsection, very similar. You have what appears to be the plane right here in the center of the rib cage, and the chest of Jesus as it stands on the cross. Next, I'll be using the vision of St. John's and the 7 candles. If we were to look at this picture, not quite the same, but if we were to zoom in on the face, you could see that the eyebrows kind of look like a lightning bolt or something of that degree, which is stretched out, very similar to this. The face goes around, very similar to that of the face of the nag. And then also the sparks around the hand. You have the mace ball right here, and where the placement of the bells and watch and the person or the fair person right there at the bottom left, very similar to where the placement of the person kneeling before this character is. The red tunic, St. John or whatnot, is red, very similar to this. So I would say that there is a bit of a similarity here, not quite perfect. But next, very similar to the last picture, we have one called Sol Justite, or the Judge. And looking at this picture right here, we could see the arms outstretched, but in this picture he is holding a scale and balance. We know that the Roanoke picture is that of a Libra and a scale and balance, so it's very interesting that he has the scale and balance there. Also, he's sitting on top of a lion. The lion is more associated with Charleston, but we could see that with the sword in his hand he seems kind of like a warrior, just he doesn't have armor on. So this could also be a bit of an inspiration. But the last picture has a lot of the symbols that we see in the Roanoke picture, and that is of one of his most famous pictures called Melancholia. We could see several things in the Melancholia picture that have to do with the Roanoke picture. Particularly in the top right corner, there is a bell, and this bell is very characteristic of the bells hanging from the right side of the armor. Also, there is a scale and balance, and we know that this is a scale and balance right here. Also, there is a compass, which Freemasons use, but also on the lower right of the angel, we have keys. And these keys are very reminiscent of what's hanging from the armor. So we have the keys, the bell, and also the scale in the Melancholia pictures. So all of these put together kind of make up what this Roanoke picture is about. Next is the Milwaukee photo, and this one was probably a little tougher than some of the others to find a good comparison with, but if we look under Leonardo da Vinci, he has something called St. Jerome in the Wilderness. Unfortunately, this picture was unfinished, but if we were to look at the hand placement and the head placement, very similar to that of the juggler. Hands are to the left, both hands to the left, and the face to the right. Also, in this picture of St. Jerome in the Wilderness, there is a lion at his feet. Very interesting to note that. But there are probably some other closer things that we can point out in the Milwaukee picture. Here we have another Albrecht Dürer picture. This one is called the Astronomer. And in the Astronomer, we see this astronomer looking down with his globe right here, with the planetary signs right here. We talked about Anima Mundi earlier, so this could be in a reference to that as well. On the right, we have another famous picture. This one is called The Temptation of Christ. And if we look, the face is somewhat similar, although the hand right here is upwards. It's in the same sign as this hand to the left. And also in the background, we have this tower right here, which is somewhat resemblant of this tower figure in the back right here. Here on the right, we have another picture of the temptation of Jesus by Satan. Again, hands are kind of pointed in the same direction, face looking to the right. This one does have a picture of the city on the side, but nothing so much that resembles the Milwaukee Tower that we had talked about previously. Here on the left, we have the Cleveland picture, and I'll be referring to Albrecht Dürer once again. Albrecht Dürer has a lot of pictures or engravings of horses. The one I'll be using is one called Small Horse. And if we were to look at the horse is very similar in shape to the centaur, same kind of design of the legs, with the only exception of the centaur's body, where the head would be. In the picture, it's under a arch dome, similar to the arch that we have right here. And also something I wanted to mention about Albrecht Dürer specifically is he would sign his name very specifically in every picture. And you can see here it's basically an A with a D underneath the A. At the bottom of the Cleveland picture, we have something very similar. And you can see what appears to be an L with a bell. And the bell we already saw in Melancholia. But if we were to turn this picture clockwise, you would be able to see that this kind of looks like a little bit like an A, and then you have the D right there. So I believe that this is a bit of a shout out to Albrecht Dürer, who a lot of these pictures are based off of. And there's also one other picture I wanted to show, and that is going to be Sandro Botticelli's picture of the Nativity. I'm not going to say that this matches 100%, but obviously you have a arched doorway. Here you have an arched picture, and you have angels on top of the frame. Here you have a centaur on top of the frame, and that of the nativity scene in the middle. Not quite the same, as there are no figures in the bottom of the picture, but always good to note that. Also, Botticelli had another picture called Pallas and the Centaur. And although this doesn't really look like the Cleveland picture, it's good to note since he's the only artist of the four that I'm talking about that has a centaur picture. Next, we have the Charleston picture with the lion in it. There's a couple of things in this picture that I'm going to point out to you, but one thing that stands out is the pear. The pear is also symbolic of that of the baby Jesus. You're going to find a lot of pictures of the Virgin Mary and child, or Mary and Jesus. Here's a picture from Nicolas Poussin. And although this picture doesn't have anything to do with a pear per se, the positioning of the Virgin and the baby Jesus is very similar to what's happening here. But we do have a mention of a pear in another artist, and that is Albrecht Dürer. Several of his pictures are actually called Madonna with the pear. And you can see here that she has a pear in her hand, while here's the head and here's the baby Jesus, kind of in a similar position here with the pear being down here. He also has several other pictures similarly. Here we have a color picture by Albert Dürer called Madonna of the Pear. This picture is actually flipped from what this would be right here, but you can see Madonna and the Pear. Even though they call it the child here, the name is actually Madonna of the Pear. And here is one other picture from Albert Dürer called Madonna and the Child with the Pear. So this picture is actually just flipped, but here's the pear in hand, here's the Madonna with the child. So I'm going to say that this is going to be Madonna with the child and pear. Here on the left we have the Chicago painting. I couldn't find too many comps for this one, but there was one, and it's by Albert Dürer once again, and it's going to be that of St. Anthony. And if we were to look here, we can see a city above where St. Anthony is sitting. And if we were to zoom in just on St. Anthony's face, you could see that the hood around the face, kind of similar to this, the point right here, kind of similar to the point of the ear. The nose is sticking out, although this nose is a lot more embellished. And then you don't see the eyes here, but here you do. And you could see the city basically right on top of him with the largest point right in the middle, similar to this one. You have a bit of a square roof right here with the windows, and this looks like an obelisk type thing, probably just moved over to the right where the water tower is. So if we were just to square this picture off right here, I would say that this is pretty close to the Chicago picture, that of St. Anthony. So next we'll move on. Next on the left we have the San Francisco picture, and this is probably going to be one of the easier ones to point out directly to a specific picture, and that's going to be of Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin of the Rocks. There are two different Virgin of the Rocks. One is in the Louvre and another one is in London. The one in London is not 100% accepted, but it's generally accepted, and then the one in the Louvre is more universally accepted. But if we were to look at the Louvre version, we could see that the hairstyle is kind of similar with a little bit of curls as the woman in the middle. Also, the title Virgin on the Rocks. We know that this picture represents Virgo, Virgo the Virgin, so it makes sense. So this picture lines up, especially with the rocks in the background and the semi-circle design on the top. That kind of makes it stand out as why this would be Virgin of the Rocks. And if we were to look at the British version, the coloration is a lot more similar, with the blue being a lot more brighter, and also this kind of crag in the rocks right here, very similar to the crag in the rocks right there, and the rock mountain structure on top, very similar to what we see here. So Virgin of the Rocks by Leonardo da Vinci is the San Francisco picture, and we'll move on. Next on the left we have the Houston picture. And there's a lot of different pictures that have to do with the same thing, but I settled for a picture by Nicolas Poussin called The Flight into Egypt, or Resting on the Journey. This has to do with the Holy Family going to Egypt to hide for a little bit, but if we were to pull up that picture, we could see two pillars or two columns, very similar to what we see in this picture right here. And we can see a mountain in the background, similar to a mountain in the background right here. Also, the Virgin Mary, who's holding the baby Jesus. The Virgin Mary is looking in the same direction as this Jinn genie, same kind of color of clothing, whitish blue. Also on the right side you have trees, so kind of fits on the right side. You have trees and then a bluish sky. So I'm going to say that this is Flight into Egypt of the Holy Family by Nicolas Poussin. Also, I want to say one thing about this column with a rhino right here. I'm pretty sure that rhinoceroses weren't very common in Europe at the time, so Albert Dürer actually had a picture of a rhino, so just wanted to give him credit for that, because during the 15th century, I'm pretty sure there weren't many rhinos in Europe, so I'll give him a little credit as well. Next, we have the St. Augustine picture. For this picture, I'm going to be using that of Botticelli. And one thing that Botticelli does that none of the other painters really do is that he has several pictures of St. Augustine. One picture in particular, called St. Augustine, obviously, is of St. Augustine sitting at his desk writing. And you can kind of see that the way that he's postured and sitting, this is very similar to that of the rock formation. Although we were talking about in the last video how this could be the Religio Medici, St. Augustine was first and foremost a Christian theologian and philosopher from Roman Africa, and he deeply influenced Western philosophy and Western Christianity, and is viewed as one of the most important church fathers of the Latin Church. So it would be no surprise that we would actually have a reference to St. Augustine in St. Augustine. And although the picture has St. Augustine seated in the opposite direction, if we just flip that picture, you can see that there is a general similarity of how the face is. I mean, this to me always looked like the shape of a face. The hands aren't in the picture right here, but there is a bit of a space and a gap right in back of St. Augustine, similar to this picture right here, and you have him looking out in the right direction. Very similar. So I'm not going to say 100%, but I would think that it is something that was meant to be included for the St. Augustine picture. Now, as far as the horse on top goes, I'm going to refer to once again to Albrecht Dürer. There's a picture called The Knight, the Death, and the Devil. And although it's not going to be 100% similar, there are a lot of pictures by Albrecht Dürer that have to do with horses and knights on horseback. So even though this is a Spanish knight, although this one is marching and the one in the picture is standing, a little bit of a similarity. Also, just wanted to make a quick reference to another book. It's called The Hours of Charles of Angoulême, and he was the father of the King Francis I of France. He also had a book. One of the pictures in there has one of these banner flags similar to this one, although this one is going to be upside down compared to this one. And then also there is a little bit of a castle in the background similar to that of Chicago. So we'll move on. Now here we have the New York picture on the left. We talked about this as being Saint Mary or the Virgin Mary, and the pictures I'm going to be using are from Nicolas Poussin here. The first picture we have is the Assumption of Mary. As Mary in New York is about halfway up through the picture, you can only assume that she's rising up. She's not standing on anything. So here Nicolas Poussin has a picture of the Assumption of Mary, but there are other pictures, and I'll show you another. Here we have another one called The Assumption of the Virgin, and you can see Mary in the air with angels above her guiding her up. And there are a couple of other pictures by Poussin that kind of fit the mold of what we're looking at, and both of them are called Annunciation. And here you can see the Virgin Mary with a bird above her head with her hands outstretched similar to this. In the New York picture we have the bird flying above the head of St. Mary, not quite directly above, and the bird above the head usually signifies the Holy Spirit. So I'm not going to say that the bird in the New York picture is exactly the Holy Spirit, but could be. And in another version that he did, there's another Annunciation. And this picture is not as bright, but still Mary's hands are outstretched along with the bird above her head, signifying the Holy Spirit. So that's most likely what these pictures are representing, the Assumption or the Annunciation of Mary as the Holy Spirit above. And we have one more picture here from Albrecht Dürer. This is a woodcutting picture. Here we have another version of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary here. And if we zoomed in, we could see the bird above her head and Mary being crowned up above, but she is in the air above as she rises. So this is most likely the interpretation of the New York picture. Also, just for fun, I wanted to throw this one in. The picture on the right is called The Allegory of Fate, and you could see a distinct similarity with the New York picture here, almost identical in a lot of ways. The sash going downwards along the midsection and the outstretched hands. Where in the New York picture, the Virgin Mary is holding a flower. Here on the other side of the Allegory of Fate, the man with the beard is holding what's known as a caduceus, which is also a medical symbol. So there could be other inspirations for these pictures, but I just wanted to share this one for fun. Next, we have the New Orleans picture on the left side. This one was a little bit more difficult to find something matching per se, but I did find something from Albert Durr once again, and this is going to be the Adoration of the Trinity, the Landauer altar with a frame designed by Albert Durr. And when you look at it and you compare, this is almost identical to what the clock looks like starting from the base, which is right in the middle of the New Orleans picture. The two sidebars. Above, you have the circular semicircle with Jesus and the other biblical figures in it. The picture on the inside is actually called the Adoration of the Trinity, and here you can just see a clear picture of what's actually being in there, which is Jesus being crucified, the Holy Spirit up above, and all the people who are adoring Jesus as he ascends into heaven, basically. And it looks pretty spot on to what we're looking at as far as the top of the grandfather clock goes. And last but certainly not least, we have the cover picture of Boston. This one was a little difficult because there is no exact representation of the Boston picture that I was able to find. But looking through a lot of the pictures, the picture that I seemed to find to draw most comparison to was Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. And if you guys know anything about Salvator Mundi, the painting, it was basically the most expensive painting ever sold. It sold for $450.3 million back in 2017. So definitely a very valued piece of artwork. But when we're looking at the Salvator Mundi picture and we compare that to that of the Boston picture, you're going to see a few similarities, namely the hair color is very similar or reddish. You can see a bit of the neckline, and around the neck there is a bit of a stitching around there. Also the hands, one of Jesus's hands is holding an orb, and we do see a lot of orbs along the bottom of the painting. However, Jesus's left hand is pointed upwards and it looks like he's kind of crossing his fingers, but there seems to be a bit of a similarity here. It's also interesting to note that Leonardo's friend Albrecht Dürer also had a Salvator Mundi picture that he was working on. This was unfinished at the time of his death, but something similar with an orb in his hand. You can see that he's holding it, similar to how the woman in the Boston picture is holding the box and her hands are up. The tunic is blue, very similar to that of Leonardo's Salvator Mundi, and it seems like this is a bit of a match. There was one other thing that I found that didn't relate so much to art, but I want to share that with you. So on the side of the Scottish Rites Temple in Los Angeles, there's actually a mural or a mosaic on the side. Here's a clearer picture. One of the mosaic pictures actually talks about Reims, the Reims Cathedral. And if you know anything about the Reims Cathedral, this is where the kings of France usually went to get crowned. Joan of Arc actually enabled the surrender and liberation of the Cathedral of Reims, and she helped crown the Dauphin Charles as king of France, and he became Charles VII. Reims Cathedral is also known as Notre Dame de Reims, so Our Lady of Reims. And another person who was buried within Reims Cathedral was a man named Hugues Libergier. And Hugh Libergier helped design the cathedral at Reims as well as others. But if we were to look at his epitaph that he had, it's kind of similar in the sense that there is a picture of him holding his cathedral. And if you zoom in, you can see a picture of his hand holding the cathedral, which is very similar to what the woman in the Boston picture is doing. And the face, you can see the nose, bit of an outline, and how the upper eyebrows connect with the nose, very similar to this picture right here. There is a little bit of an eerie resemblance. Also, a couple of other things found in Hugh Libergier's epitaph. At the bottom of the picture, they have something that's known as a sector, and a sector was basically an early compass and had a tri-square, which is basically the square that many masons use. put together the compass and the square, that makes the Freemason symbol right there. So an early stonemason with Freemason tools in his picture. So after going through all 12 pictures, we can see that there's a bit of some similarities to some people who were supposedly claimed as grand masters of the Priory of Sion, namely being Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli. But we can also see that Nicholas Poussin, who is named in the Priory of Sion documents, a couple of his artworks looks like they did inspire some of the artistry in The Secret. Albert Durr was nowhere to be mentioned in any of those things, but he was somebody that I found while doing research, and it seems like a lot of his art played an essential role in inspiring some of the creations that Jean Jude Palencar used for his pictures. Can I say it with 100% certainty on all the pictures? No. But I can say that for the most part, you can see a lot of similarities. So saying that his artwork is totally original, I would say is false. A lot of his artwork is based off of other drawings and other symbols and whatnot. They're just a combination of all of them. His art is definitely original in what he did with it, but they were based off of something else. Priory of Sion, possibly, but other artists, definitely. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you next time.